Good afternoon to everyone.
Good afternoon, sir.
How are you?
Fine, sir.
I hope all of you are quite well.
Yes, sir.
By the way, I have posted in your WhatsApp group saying that, well, I hope you don't have any problem with the love song. And a number of you wrote that, well, you have understood the poem. So, well, that's the reason that I thought it's better that we move on from that first poem by Eliot. In fact, in your syllabus, you have another poem by T.S. Eliot, and that is uh, The Hollow Men. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, you have another poem, The Hollow Men. But anyway, what I feel that at this moment we should do is we should study one poem by W.B. Yeats and then move on to either finish W.B. Yeats and then go back to the last poem by Eliot, that is The Hollow Men. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is I'll start giving you a kind of an introduction to W.B. Yeats, William Butler Yeats, so that you can understand one very important poem that you have in your syllabus, that is the Second Coming. Okay, that's the first poem that we are going to study after we finish understanding the introduction to W.B. Yeats and especially the kind of poet that he was and his philosophy and what he wanted to do in his poetry. Okay, so uh, well, before I start saying anything, can anyone tell me anything that you know about W.B. Yeats or whether you read anything about W.B. Yeats? Has anybody had any idea about W.B. Yeats? Yes or no? None of you are responding. So can I presume that, well, majority of you do not really have much of an idea about what kind of a poet he was? In fact, you would be wondering if I tell you that W.B. Yeats, whose name is generally known to students as a poet, wrote around 40 plays, right? Uh, so that is something that we must keep in mind. And in fact, he was one of the such figures in English literature, like like T.S. Eliot. You just cannot imagine the modern English poetry without W.B. Yeats. So that's something very, very great about Yeats. Now, coming straight to the introduction that I was referring to you. Now, William Butler Yeats was born in 1865, died in 1939. So you can see that actually he belonged to the later half of the Victorian period and the first half of the modern period. But interestingly, he was often called one of the last romantics. Why last romantics? Last romantics because in his poetry, especially in his earlier writings, you would find that he had a kind of a yearning, like the romantic poets, for the past, for some kind of a folk culture, some kind of a magic, right? Now, Yeats studied painting and he retained a passionate love and understanding for painting throughout his life. Yeats's father's rationalism and the aftermath of the Darwinian controversy had pretended him from accepting orthodox, not pretended actually, it prevented him from accepting orthodox Christianity, and he explored instead theosophy. Try to understand. I'll come back to theosophy later on. Now, he was interested in theosophy, Rosicrucianism, Platonism, Neoplatonism, and then he turned to spiritualism, especially under the influence of Madame Blavatsky. He liked magic and he was deeply influenced by the Upanishads. And when you talk about W.B. Yeats, W.B. Yeats cannot be really only considered as a poet. He was a poet, a skeptic, a political speaker, a prophet, a playwright, I already told you. And most importantly, like T.S. Eliot, in W.B. Yeats also, you find there is an amalgamation of paradoxes. Like any modern writer, you see, modernity is marked by an inherent contradiction. And in Yeats also, you find a number of paradoxes. Especially, on one hand, he was a he was a poet. He was uh, a spokesperson in favor of the flesh, and on the other hand, he talked about the spirit. So, on one hand, the body, on another hand, the spirit. He loved a woman called Maud Gonne, but that love was never consummated. So he became frustrated and he went on to marry another woman called Georgie Hyde Lees. Just some important aspects about his biography, and perhaps you know that he was instrumental, or rather, he helped Tagore to get his Nobel Prize, but because it was Yeats who translated Gitanjali, and which helped, in fact, Tagore to get his Nobel Prize. And Yeats also went on to win the Nobel Prize in 1923. I just mentioned to you that Yeats was considered to be one of the last romantics. Why? Because actually, uh, especially in his earlier phase of his life, he was a visionary and yet very much self analyzing, self deprecating. But then, if life is, in one of his poems, he says that if life is even a blind man's bitch, he would prefer to be born again and again. He is ready to drink the bitter lees, drink life to its bitter lees. Uh, Yeats, Yeats went on to write his autobiography, and in fact, it reflects references, topical references about Irish history as well as Irish culture. Now, a number of very interesting poems that he went on to write includes the other poem that you have in your syllabus, Byzantium, Sailing to Byzantium. One very important poem is a Second Coming that you have in your syllabus. Uh, and The Tower, for example, uh, and especially the last poems. In fact, in Yeats's poetry, you find a dominant figure uh, of his time, part of all he saw and felt. So Yeats's poetry tells us about what Yeats saw and Yeats felt. At heart, he was a dreamer, a visionary, fascinated by folklores, balladry, and the superstitions of the Irish peasantry. He was an Irish man, actually. He was born in Ireland. And he felt naturally out of place in a world of scientific facts and machinery, in which truth was tasted by logic and sense evidences. Actually, if you believe that there is a reality beyond the mundane, if you believe that, well, there is a reality which you cannot really perceive by with the help of your five senses, what actually are you doing? You mean, and you rather believe, uh, you believe it in believe it wholeheartedly, that there is something which cannot be really perceived by our five senses. And that is one of the reasons when I just mentioned to you that Yeats was a visionary. Visionary means what? Visionary is somebody who can go beyond the common, go beyond the apparent. And I told you that he was fascinated by folklores, by myths, by ballads, by the superstitions of the Irish peasantry. And naturally, he didn't really love much the rationalistic, objective, logical, scientific facts and the mundane world of the modern days. Right. So he tried to show that modern civilization tends to blunt our fundamental consciousness of ourselves. Occult influences could, yet believed, penetrate our spirits and sharpen our senses with a mysterious kind of awareness. So, if you really want to know the truth, it doesn't really lie only in the objective or in the matter of fact. In fact, to understand Yeats, it is very important that you all should know something about what he wrote in his autobiography, which he called A Vision. In pages after pages, there he talks about his own interpretation of life and history. To Yeats, every 2000 years, there is a millennium. And every 2000 years, there is a change in the civilization. He believed that if you look at the change in times, right, you would find that first, if it is, well, if 2000 years were dominated by objectivity, the next 2000 years would be dominated by just its opposite, which he calls self and anti-self. So he believed that every 2000 years there would be a millennium. Millennium is complete change in the nature of life, in the attitude to life. And therefore, the Christian era, now this is 2020. So if you believe in Yeats, it's already, the change has already come. I mean, after 2000 years, the Christian era has come to its fag end and a new era has dawned. In fact, to understand Yeats's theory of history, system of history, I would like to show you a particular image which perhaps would help you to understand it better. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Mark this. Just I am pointing out with my cursor. Look at this. Here you have two cones. One in this way, and another is placed mouth downwards, right? So both are opposite to each other. And yet looked at reality or looked at the cycle of history uh, and tried to interpret and understand it with the help of these two interpenetrative gyres. Look at this. Now, just think that if if the first, this is the first cone. You look at this first cone. If this first cone is an objective age marked by objectivity, objectivity means uh, science, means materialism, means faculties dominated by our mind. The antithetical, that is the other cone, which is lying here opposite, mouth downwards, it is an antithetical, it is subjective. And interestingly, if you look at the beginning point of this cone, this is the first point here. Here, mark from here, this cone has started expanding, right? So this is the gradually this particular cone has expanded to its highest here. And if you look at this opposite cone, this is the beginning, and this gradually then keeps on expanding, expanding, expanding. Now, what is interesting to understand by looking at this figure is that market here, when you look at this first cone, the apex, the beginning point is where it is at the most intense moment, because it is most compressed. Try to understand. And then as it evolves, as it grows further and further, you would find that it becomes gradually dissipated. Mark that. If I draw a kind of an image here, just wait. Now mark it here. What I just was trying to tell you is that when you look at this first cone and you look at this point where the cone has started, you find that it is at its most intense moment. That means all the characteristics of this particular era is at its summit, and then it gradually starts expanding. See, it gradually expands, and then here you come, then this is, if you go on circling like this, and then you come here, and this is the circle, then you come, and at this moment when it is at its most expanded, then it is most lax. And interestingly, because it is interpenetrating, that means nowhere would you find sheer objectivity or sheer subjectivity. You see, when you talk about night and day, let me give you another parallel to make you understand what I actually am intending to make you understand. See, when you talk about night, think about a night and day. At 2 o'clock, right? At 2 o'clock, what happens? You say it is dark pitch night. Now, dark pitch night, do you really mean that at that moment there is no light? If there is no light, you can't see. Even to see that it is night, you require light. Even to see darkness, you require light. So actually, in 24 hours, you won't find a single second when it is absolute darkness or absolute light, right? This is the paradox that you have to understand. In the same manner, in Yeatsian interpretation of reality, interpretation of history, you find that every 2000 years, an era changes. And this change has all the time been happening. So 2000 years later, the change has come to be noticed. Doesn't mean that the change was not occurring, right? So if this particular cone is the marker of an age, and if the second cone is the marker of either the previous or the future cone, you have to understand that at every second, either the first cone is at its highest and the second cone as its lowest, right? And then one is contracting, another is expanding. আমি কি তোমাদের বোঝাতে পারছি কি বলতে চাইছি আমি? জাস্ট কল্পনা করো দুটো কোণ, দুটো কোণ মানে দুটো আলাদা আলাদা ফ্যাকাল্টি ওয়ালা, দুটো ক্যারেক্টারিস্টিক ওয়ালা এজ। এবং যেমন বললাম, রাত দুটোর সময় যদি একদম নিকষ কালো হয়ে যায়, সেই সময় যেন কালোটা প্রাধান্য পাচ্ছে, আলোটা খুব কম, কিন্তু আলো আছে বলেই আমি আর রাতটাকে বুঝতে পারছি, রাইট? And then what happens after 2 a.m. gradually it becomes a bit more light. I mean less dark, further less dark, further less dark. And the moment we say further less dark means a bit more light, a bit more light. So parallel, simultaneously, you have less dark, more light, less dark, more light. And when you have 12 noon or 1 p.m., then it is absolute brightness. Doesn't mean it's only 100% brightness. Even there, you have already the evening or the night has started happening, which is not really marked because you have such powerful brightness. So you have to understand this very image of these two interpenetrated gyres, by which Yeats tries to interpret the fact that whether it is life, or whether it is history, whether it is a cycle, whether it is civilization, it's constantly changing, constantly changing, right? Every second it is changing, and it is every second it has the duality, it has the contradiction, it has the two opposite aspects, right? So that is something very, very important for all of you to understand. তোমরা কি বুঝতে পেরেছো আমি কি বলতে চাইলাম? Yes or no? You can see also another,
Yes, sir.
এই যে ইমেজটা দেখো, এই যে ইমেজটা, right? You can see even this image. Mark this. I have moved my cursor here. Look at this. Now, this all are interpenetrative, and here 2 different colors are used. So mark that. This is that, right? Okay. So you have all this. Mark this. This is again another image to make you understand about the 2 interpenetrated cones. And this is actually the concrete reflection of what Yeats understood by the civilization and the change in civilization. You have here 2 different colors. So if this grayish color is primary and this reddish is the antithetical, right? So you mark that where you have the antithetical at its most condensed, here you have the primary at its most expanded. And expanded means the least passionate, least intense. Okay. So could I make you understand what what Yeats has done in his interpretation of cycles or history? Okay. Now, so then this was his interpretation of history, and from the works of Madame Blavatsky, Yeats learned a particular phrase. In your poem, The Second Coming, you have Spiritus Mundi. Spiritus Mundi and Anima Mundi are virtually the 2 same phrases. Now, he learned from Madame Blavatsky that Anima Mundi or Spiritus Mundi is a reservoir of all that has touched mankind, influenced mankind, impacted mankind, and all that has influenced mankind in one way or the other down the ages, not just today or yesterday or tomorrow. Whatever has influenced man, whatever has been spoken or felt or done, may be evoked by symbols. So you have to understand that anima mundi or spiritus mundi is a kind of a storehouse. You see, it's a storehouse where all symbols are stored. Everything is stored there. তোমরা হয়তো শুনেছো সায়েন্সও বিশ্বাস করে যে আমরা যে কথাগুলো বলি কোনোটাই কিন্তু হারিয়ে যায় না। তাহলে আমরা শুনতে পাই না কেন? বিকজ গ্র্যাজুয়ালি দ্য ইন্টেন্সিটি ডিক্রিজেস। সেই জন্য আর ওগুলো আমরা কানে শুনতে পাই না, বাট দে রিমেইন সামওয়্যার অর দি আদার। In the same manner, anima mundi or spiritus mundi is a storehouse of all that has happened, all that might happen, and these can be evoked by symbols. And therefore, symbols, and if you attain a certain level of consciousness, heightened consciousness, right, which you can obviously relate to awareness, then you can penetrate the apparently impenetrable well. একটা পর্দা আছে। আমরা যদি ধ্যানস্থ হতে পারি, আমরা যদি, যেটা তোমরা ওয়ার্ডসওয়ার্থের কবিতাতে পড়েছো, টিনটন অ্যাবিতে পড়েছো, যে এমন একটা স্টেজ আসে যখন ধ্যানস্থ হয়ে we just, our body becomes suspended, all our senses become suspended, and we are in a transcendental stage. So like that, might arrive by our very intense awareness. Then the veil of this otherwise impenetrable anima mundi can be open and accessed. We can go into it and we can see what is there. And if you can link yourself up with that spiritus mundi or anima mundi, then you can foresee the future. You can understand the past, you can analyze the past, you can even understand what lies ahead. So that is what Yeats says, that, and for Yeats, symbols are never the end, but the beginning of the process. He was interested actually in things so evoked. Right. Now, Yeatsian system, which I was just trying to make you understand, I just mentioned to you about his wife's name, George Heidlis. And because Yeats believed that there is a supreme reality, there is a reality beyond this obvious reality, right? Therefore, almost like Planchat. তোমরা নাম শুনেছো Planchat? Anybody?
Yes, sir.
Now, what is that Planchat?
ওটার যেটা ঘোস্ট কলিং করা হয় ওই ইয়ে দিয়ে।
Yes, right, you are. কি করে ghost calling করা হয়?
স্যার একটা প্ল্যানচেট বলে একটা ইয়ে থাকে, ওটার মধ্যে সব ক্যান্ডেল পাশে লাগিয়ে দিয়ে ওই ঘোস্টকে ডাকে। আমি করিনি।
না না না, ঠিক আছে, করনি, কিন্তু তুমি শুনেছো, ঠিকই বলছো যে কেউ যদি দিন কয়েক আগেই মারা গেছে, এটা বিশ্বাস করা হয় যে কেউ মারা গেলে তার আত্মা আমাদেরই আশেপাশে কোথাও ঘোরাঘুরি করে, এবং সেই সময় যদি একটু অন্ধকার করে ক্যান্ডেল জ্বালিয়ে, the whole purpose of lighting the candle is nothing but just to concentrate, যে মনে করো ক্যান্ডেল জ্বালিয়ে আমরা 5-7 জন 10 জন বসে সবাই শুধু ক্যান্ডেলের যে উইক তার দিকে তাকাচ্ছে, সেই শিখার দিকে সবাই তাকাচ্ছে, and they are all only thinking about that particular person who has recently died. তাহলে অনেক সময় সেই ক্যান্ডেলের সেই শিখা ওটা নাকি নড়তে শুরু করে, which is an indication that the spirit has come. And in that case, suddenly one of those who have been participating in this planchat becomes directly affected by the presence of the spirit. That means the ওই যে স্পিরিটটাকে ভর করা বলি না আমরা, আত্মা ভর করেছে, ওরকম একজনের মধ্যে ওই আত্মা ভর করে। And in Yeats, you find that his wife, George Hyde Lees, she used to become that medium of the spirit. And under that awakened state, she used to keep saying and automatic writing. তখন George Hyde Lees, under the influence of the spirit, used to write a lot. And that helped Yeats to compose his writing a vision in which he interprets certain very mysterious and esoteric kind of things. Now, in Yeatsian system, Yeats believed that the human personality follows the pattern of a great wheel. And that great wheel is a circular journey. One very interesting thing that I would like to share here with you is that when you talk about Wordsworth, if Wordsworth's poetry is a poetry of destination, আমরা টিনটেন অ্যাবে পড়েছি, টিনটেন অ্যাবেতে আমরা তিনটে ফেজ দেখছি in the evolution of man's attitude towards nature or man's growth, right? So Wordsworth's poetry is in a way the poetry of destination, but Yeats's poetry is poetry of journey. সেখানে কোনো ডেস্টিনেশন বলে কিছু নেই। It's a cyclical journey. So you begin from a point, and then you move ahead. Apparently you are moving ahead, but actually because it's a circular or cyclical journey, then what happens is you begin from point A, move to point B, C, D, E, and F and all, and then you find that you have come back to point A again. So the Yeatsian poetry is the poetry of journey. It's a circular journey to and fro between complete subjectivity and complete objectivity, lying at two different poles and yet very interestingly interpenetrating each other. Right. এটা একটা খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট ফ্যাক্টর যেটা আমাদের বুঝতে হবে, এবং বিশেষ করে দ্য সেকেন্ড কামিং, এই যে কবিতাটা তোমাদের সিলেবাসে আছে, সেই কবিতা বোঝার জন্য খুব কাজে লাগবে এই interpretation of Yeatsian interpretation of history. This poem, The Second Coming, actually was included in the volume of poems called Michael Roberts and the Dancer, which was written in 1919 and published in 1920. And the title, The Second Coming, has been taken from the Christian doctrine. Actually, here, in the poem The Second Coming, Yeats is expressing his reaction to the political fanaticism let loose by the nationalist struggle against England in Ireland. অনেকগুলো historical incidents তার একটা রেফারেন্স বা তার টপিক্যাল রেফারেন্স আমরা পাই এই কবিতার মধ্যে। একটা হচ্ছে যে ইস্টার রাইজিং, 1916 ইস্টার রাইজিং, যেখানে বেশ কয়েকজন আইরিশ under the leadership of some, they revolted against the British and temporarily declared a kind of independence, right? Easter Rising, সেখানে বেশ কিছু জন শেষে মারাও গেছিল when the British army retaliated. So here that was one direct reference. Another was there was a civil war in Russia in 1917. Then you have, if I talk about 1919, one very important historical event you must remember. What is that? Something very World War, right? Absolutely, all right. That is the First World War. So obviously, Yeats had the gory bloodshed, right? Thousands of people died in the First World War. So all that massive destruction and loss of human life must have been in Yeats's mind. That directly is related to the First World War. I just mentioned to you the Easter Rising in Ireland and another civil war in Russia in 1917. So all must have been there in Yeats's mind when he composed his poem, The Second Coming. Why second? Now we will gradually understand the implication of the word second. Coming is here not the ordinary coming or going of a person. Coming is here the advent, আবির্ভাব যেটাকে আমরা বলি. The first coming was obviously Jesus Christ's coming. অর্থাৎ যখন জিসাস, অর্থাৎ যখন স্বয়ং ভগবান যিশুর বেশে আবির্ভূত হয়েছিলেন পৃথিবীতে, that was the first coming. And naturally the second coming, what kind of a second arrival, advent of God would happen, that is what is Yeats trying to do in this poem. কি হবে তার প্রকৃতি? What would be the nature of that second advent of God? Will it be some very merciful, loving, caring kind of an image, almost like Jesus Christ, who sacrificed his life on the cross for the redemption of mankind? Or will it be some antichrist, some kind of a beastly figure, very cruel, that would do something or the other? এই ধরনের একটা ব্যাপার আছে, আমরা যখন এই কবিতাটা ডিটেইলে পড়ব তখন দেখব in the poem The Second Coming. What I suggest to you, I just today don't want to go beyond this introduction, and I want you to read the poem at your level and try and understand what is there, and see if you can understand what is there in the poem. Read the poem, try and understand it. Let you have some questions in your mind, so that when I discuss with you the text, when I try to explain to you the text word by word, phrase by phrase, well, you can see whether all the queries that you have already in your mind are answered or not. তোমরা সেই সমস্ত প্রশ্নের উত্তর পাচ্ছ না, না এমন কিছু থেকে যাচ্ছে যেটা এখনো পরিষ্কার নয়. Right, now, before I end today's session, you have any question to ask me? Does anybody have any question? Any question to ask? I can find 24 of you are here. Yeah, is there anybody who is asking? Who is there? কে কথা বলছো? I'm not able to hear you. Who is it? Who is speaking? বলো কি বলছো বলো?
Yeats interpretation of history জায়গাটা আমি বুঝতে পারিনি.
কোনটা বুঝতে পারোনি?
Yeats interpretation of history.
Interpretation of history, আমি বললাম every 2000 years there would be a change in the nature of civilization. One will be objective, one will be subjective. That means one will be ruled by the mind, ruled by the materialism. Another would be ruled by the heart, the conscience, the spirit. That is the subjectivity. That is the kind of a shift from one end to the other. But then this shift you have to understand, because that is the reason why I took some time to interpret Yeatsian understanding of history and interpretation of history with the help of that interpenetrative gyres, যে এটা কখনোই সম্ভব নয় যে পুরোপুরি অবজেক্টিভ পুরোপুরি সাবজেক্টিভ. You have a mixture of the two. It's just a question of which one is dominating. ঠিক আছে? সুতরাং আমরা যখন ক্রিশ্চিয়ান ইরাতে ছিলাম, তখন যে ইন্টারপ্রিটেশন, তখন যে সভ্যতা আমরা পেয়েছি, after the end of the Christian era, because 2000 years have already gone by, now we are awaiting an age in which, now Yeats has not made it very clear, that is the beauty of his poetry, he has left it open-ended, কিন্তু উনি ছেড়ে দিয়েছেন এরকম একটা ইঙ্গিত করে যে সম্ভবত এবার পশ্চিমী সভ্যতার